Salty diets are leading to health complications around the globe.
We want to reduce salt in our diet.
And the CDC says most of us need to cut back on just how much we eat.
Launched a campaign to reduce salt in
Your fat doctor is wrong about how much salt you should be ingesting. We've been taught to suppress our sodium intake to crazy low levels because if you don't, it apparently leads to high blood pressure and negative effects on the heart. It's bullshit. This information, at least in my opinion, is wrong and you should probably not listen to the guidelines. The US federal government's guidelines currently say that you should be ingesting a maximum of 2.3 grams of sodium, which means 5.75 grams of regular table salt. In 2012, the World Health Organization also came out with guidelines that say you should not ingest more than 2 grams of sodium a day. Just for context, 1 teaspoon of table salt contains 2.3 grams of sodium. It's also important to note that salt is comprised of about 40% sodium. Sodium is essential for normal bodily function. It's needed to maintain proper fluid balance in your body. Your brain needs sodium to be able to function properly and send electrical signals to other neurons and other areas of your body. Without sodium, your neurons won't be able to fire. Sodium is also needed for digestion. Salt helps the transfer of chloride ions into the hydrochloric acid in your stomach.
But what happens is salt helps the transfer of chloride ions into the hydrochloric acid within the stomach. And the hydrochloric acid is what helps you digest. And the hydrochloric acid is also going to be what prevents you from contracting a foodborne illness. So a lot of times making sure you get enough salt can literally keep you from getting sick. It also preserves a lot of things. If you think back in olden times, what we used to always do is preserve our meats in salt. It definitely has an antibacterial, antimicrobial property, and that still takes effect.
Sodium also helps stimulate the production of digestive enzymes in the pancreas, which help break down food molecules. When you're low on sodium, you will feel horrible. You will feel lethargic, experience headaches, and you'll just generally feel disoriented because of sodium's vital role in the nervous system.
I am not drunk.
Yes, you are.
I am not fucking drunk.
Can you tell the time?
Yes. I am not fucking drunk.
I know when I upped my salt intake, I definitely felt more engaged throughout the day. However, reducing your salt intake to the dietary guidelines actually gets worse than this and can actually lead to severe health consequences. Long story short, sodium levels in our body are homeostatically driven. This means our body has hardwired processes to ensure that sodium levels don't get too low or too high. When you're on a low sodium diet, your body's renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, aka RAAS, is activated, which then signals your adrenal glands to release aldosterone in order to try to preserve sodium levels. Aldosterone's job is to hold sodium at the level of the kidneys, sweat glands, colon, and salivary glands. However, aldosterone actually causes numerous health complications including electrolyte imbalances, inflammation and oxidative stress, cognitive impairment, and high blood pressure. High levels of aldosterone stimulate the kidneys to reabsorb sodium and excrete potassium. This can cause a depletion of potassium, which can lead to muscle weakness, cramps, and irregular heartbeats. In fact, later in the video I'm going to show you a study where they found that a low potassium diet actually leads to high rates of cardiovascular disease. RAAS activation can lead to oxidative stress and inflammation, which can damage blood vessels and impair blood flow to the brain, contributing to cognitive impairment and dementia. What's really ironic is that excessive aldosterone levels will have negative impacts on your cardiovascular system. These effects include increased blood pressure, inflammation, and myocardial fibrosis, which is abnormal thickening of the heart valves. These negative effects can increase the risk of heart disease, heart attack, stroke, and heart failure. Low sodium diets can also lead to orthostatic hypotension, which is when you stand up and you feel lightheaded, dizzy, or in some cases even blackout. Clearly, low sodium diets are horrible for humans. So taking too little salt is bad for you, but what if you take too much salt? Our kidneys can actually filter out way more sodium than you think. When sodium levels get high, we start to absorb less salt from the foods we eat, and the kidneys will simply filter the excess sodium. To outline this fact, I'll show you two examples. The first one is a 1979 study which gave people with normal blood pressures various amounts of salt. They gave some people up to 87 grams of salt and found that they simply excrete most of the excess salt. Just for reference, the average salt intake is about 9 to 12 grams. Many other societies eat way more than the recommended daily salt intake, and they actually show lower rates of heart disease. Take South Koreans.
Bro, what the heck? You tripping, bro? You tripping!
Who eat lots of salty foods, including kimchi, which is basically a side dish of vegetables like cabbage, fermented and preserved in salt and spices. South Koreans actually have the lowest rates of heart disease in the world, along with France and Japan. I also just want to quickly give credit for these examples to Joseph at What I've Learned. Remember aldosterone? Well, when we ingest more salt, we basically secrete the opposite of aldosterone called natriuretic hormones. These hormones help excrete sodium out of our body and have been shown to have quite potent beneficial health effects. For example, atrial natriuretic hormone has been shown to reduce oxidative stress and help promote healthy function of blood vessels. Now, I'm definitely not encouraging you to go out of your way and ingest all the salt you can find, but increasing your salt intake moderately if you've been depriving yourself of sodium can be very beneficial for you. For healthy individuals who are insulin sensitive and don't have chronic hypertension, eating more salt than what is required is less dangerous than eating less salt. We've established that the recommended guidelines for sodium intake are extremely low and can cause undesired health effects. We've also established that ingesting higher amounts of sodium is not as dangerous as it seems. So what exactly is the optimal dose? Numerous studies have looked at this question and they all come to similar conclusions. This study in particular, published in 2014, investigated the association between sodium intake and mortality and cardiovascular outcomes. What they found was that the lowest risk of death was associated with an intake of 3 to 6 grams of sodium per day. That's more than twice the recommended guidelines. Another study, published in 2019, found that the combined moderate sodium intake of 3 to 5 grams a day with high potassium intake is associated with the lowest risk of mortality and cardiovascular events. The highest risk of mortality and cardiovascular events is linked with low potassium and low sodium diets, as well as low potassium and high sodium diets. The advice that can be taken from this study is to make sure you get adequate potassium in your diet. But here's where it gets interesting. The association with sodium intake and mortality is not linear. It is best described as a J-shape, and what we can see is that mortality cases increase far more rapidly if you go below 3 grams of sodium per day than if you were to go above 6 grams of sodium per day. Ingesting 6 times as much salt as the dietary guidelines will pose less of a risk to your health. Why in the world is salt being demonized?
Now, I'm really mad.
This is another example of modern medicine refusing to fix the root cause of an issue and sticking a band-aid on a sinking ship. We know that insulin resistance will cause excess resorption and storage of sodium at the level of the kidneys. What's the solution? To reduce sodium intake, something that's vital for health, or to fix the insulin resistance? Now, not everyone should be ingesting the same amount of salt. The amount of salt you should be ingesting is dependent on many factors. These include your genetics, exposure to hot environments, how much you exercise or exert yourself during the day, and how much caffeine you're ingesting. If you're exercising and exerting yourself more often, drinking more caffeine and/or exposed to hotter environments, you will need to increase your sodium intake and vice versa. So experiment and see what works well for you.
Damn, what is that, bro?